Hello and welcome to 10.2 Muslim Civilizations. This is the building of the Muslim Empire. In 632, Abu Bakr became the first caliph or successor to Muhammad. He united all the Arab tribes as Muslims. And once united, the Arabs defeated the Persian Empire and parts of the Byzantine Empire. However, a schism between the Sunni and the Shiite Muslims occurred after Muhammad's death and still exists today. Shiites believe that Muhammad's successor must be a descendant of his son-in-law, Ali. They also should be religious leaders and be able to interpret the Quran. The Sunnis, however, believe that any pious male Muslim from Muhammad's tribe could lead without performing religious functions. Today, about 90% of the Muslim population are Sunni. Both groups believe in the same God, the same Quran, and the same 5 pillars of Islam, but they differ in religious practices and laws. The Sufis, who may be Sunni or Shiite, meditate and fast to gain communion with God. In the 700s, a powerful Meccan clan set up the Sunni and Umayyad Caliphate. They directed conquests that extended the Muslim rule from Spain to the Indus River Valley, and their empire lasted until 750. The Muslims brought many people under their rule. Muslim leaders imposed a special tax on all non-Muslims, but Jews and Christians and Zoroastrians could continue to worship as they did before, and some held important positions within Muslim governments. Many people converted to Islam, though. However, the Umayyad later faced economic tension and opposition from those who did not have the same privileges as Muslims. Arab Muslims specifically. And after capturing Damascus in 750 AD, with the strong support from Shiites and non-Arabs, Abu al-Abbas founded the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasids ended conquests and supported education and learning. They enjoyed the Golden Age with a more effective government and a beautiful new capital in Baghdad, which was in the former Persian Empire. Mosques with minarets or slender towers graced the cities, and markets sold goods from far-off lands. In Spain, one of the still remaining Umayyads set up a separate state. Muslims ruled parts of Spain until 1492, and they were tolerant of other religions and supported scholarship and constructed grand buildings. As the empire declined, independent dynasties started to take power. The Seljuk Turks gained power, and their sultan, or ruler, controlled Baghdad by 1055, keeping the Abbasid Caliph as a figurehead. But beginning in 1216, the Mongols attacked across from Southwest Asia. In 1258, they had burned and looted Baghdad, and they ended the Abbasid dynasty. With Muhammad's death, the big question was who was going to lead this new empire that was beginning to emerge. And Abu Bakr seemed to be the logical choice. Abu Bakr was Muhammad's father-in-law, although he was actually younger than Muhammad because Muhammad had married his daughter, who was considerably younger than Muhammad. But Abu Bakr was also a very early convert to Islam. He became the first caliph, which means the successor of Muhammad. And but his main concern was that people not worship Muhammad as a god, but rather realize that he was indeed dead and that he was only a man, but that instead we should worship God because God is still alive. So his focus became to get people to unite under Islam as a religion without Muhammad becoming the main figurehead. It also made it possible for him to become the leader rather than Muhammad, someone else. Some Arab tribes refused to follow Abu Bakr because they had only been committed their loyalty to Muhammad, and now that Muhammad was dead, they didn't feel like they needed to be loyal. They had to be reconquered by Abu Bakr to reunite all the Arab tribes under Islam, rather than under their loyalty just to Muhammad. He united the tribes and quickly conquered the Arabian Peninsula. But the problem was that there were some huge empires on the very outskirts of the Arabian Peninsula. The first was almost directly to the north, and it was the Byzantine Empire. And then farther towards the east was the Persian Empire. The fortunate thing was that both of these empires had spent long periods of time fighting against one another. And so both were weakened because of this infighting. The Persian Empire fell quickly, but the Byzantine Empire took much longer to conquer. And it lost its land slowly to the Muslim Empire. First Syria and Palestine, and later Damascus, Jerusalem, North Africa, and slowly was overcome by all the Muslim forces. The new capital of the Islamic Empire became Damascus, and this was because it was more centrally located than the Arabian Peninsula. Unfortunately, or fortunately, one of the major problems was the division within the Islam, and that was the difference between the Shiites and the Sunni. And it was a matter of the question of who would rule this new empire. The Shiites believed that Muhammad's son-in-law should be his successor. This meant that they believed that only a direct descendant of Muhammad could be the ruler. The Sunni, on the other hand, believed that any pious male Muslim from Muhammad's tribe, which was actually fairly extensive, could be the ruler of the Muslim world. And the Sunnis didn't feel like the leader had to be a religious leader. They just had to be more of a political leader. Well, the Shiites, the first, had any descendant of Muhammad became known as an imam, and they felt like imams had divinely inspired powers to interpret the Quran and to lead the people. But the Shiites were definitely a minority group, and if you look today, most Shiites are found in Iran, with pockets here and there, including Lebanon and Iraq and Yemen, as well as the eastern side of Pakistan and Afghanistan. The problem is that these peoples, when they are found in countries that are predominantly Sunni, are often discriminated against. They rarely get a position in government, and they are usually from the poorer classes because they're not given economic opportunities. The Sunni, on the other hand, who believed that anyone from the Muhammad's tribe could be a good leader, are usually the majority, and most Muslims around the world are Sunni Muslims. The third division were the Sufis, which could be found both in the Shiite and the Sunni branches of Islam. The Sufis were kind of the mystical branch of Islam, and they felt that it was important to have an emotional connection with God. So they were mystics, and you could actually compare them to the medieval hermit or monk that was trying to seek God on an emotional level. These mystics seek to communicate with God through meditation and fasting and ritual. This is a picture of a Sufi in Egypt, and they're called dervishes. And you may have heard of the term whirling dervish, which I think is mentioned in The Sound of Music, one of the Sound of Music's songs. But a dervish was somebody who would, and they're still around today, who they will balance on one foot, and they go spin round and round and round on that one foot, and it's supposed to induce a trance-like state that creates some kind of emotional connection with God. They are often thought to do miracles, and in some way are closer to God than the regular person. After the Abu Bakr's death, His son-in-law, or the son-in-law, took over, Ali. But after Ali's death, there was a question of who would then take control of the Muslim empire, and it ended up becoming it ended up being taken by a clan from the tribe of Muhammad that set up the Umayyad Caliphate, which is another way of saying the Umayyad dynasty. And the Umayyad dynasty ruled the Muslim empire until about 750 AD. They made their capital in Damascus. The Umayyad dynasty was very successful militarily, and they expanded the Muslim empire all the way from Egypt down across North Africa, and conquering also in the east Persia and up into India as well. But they're probably best known for their incursion up into Spain. And they would have gone all the way up into the rest of Europe, but for a very strategic battle that was fought and won by the Frankish tribes that were living in what is modern-day France. And this battle was called the Battle of Tours, where the invading forces of Muslim bands were stopped by a ruler or a leader named Charles Martel. One of the reasons for the Muslims' early success was that the Byzantine and Persian empires were greatly weakened by their fighting between one another. Many of the people who were living under these two regimes were actually happy to see the Muslim invaders come, because it relieved them from their very heavy tax burden and enabled them to thrive rather than survive. Another reason why the Muslim invaders were so able was because they had a cavalry, which was a very effective form of military conquest. The Muslim invaders were using both horses and camels, and that enabled them to be very fast, and quickly they spread their empire very, very far. Finally, they were very fanatical about their new religion, and that enabled them to conquer because their desire to bring glory to their God. They were also very good at developing an orderly system of administration, and this enabled them to keep the empire that they had conquered. Conquered peoples were sometimes treated very well, depending on which religion they practiced. The two main religions that were still accepted by the Muslims were the Christians and the Jews, and also the Zoroastrians, which were in Persia. But these three main peoples, or main religions, were accepted because they were monotheistic. Zoroastrianism was a unique situation. It was considered acceptable simply because it was not as polytheistic as some of the other religious. Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions because it was founded by the prophet Zoroaster, and was in ancient Iran since 1500 BC. So this religion believes that there is only one God, and his name is Ahura Mazda, which means wise Lord, and that he created the world. And they are not fire worshippers, but they believe that the elements are purified by fire, and fire represents God's light and wisdom. So all three of these religions were granted freedom of worship for a fee, of course. They were expected to pay an extra tax for their freedom. But they were also given a bit of political freedom as well. They were able to maintain their moral codes and laws and practices that they had had before the Muslim conquest. Muslim leaders also prohibited the looting and destruction of conquered areas by their invading forces. And this made the conquered peoples much more willing to be ruled by the Muslims because of their fair treatment. Arabs kept a separate life from those that they had conquered. They established an elite class of people that were purely Arabic and or from the Arab people group, and this began to create a bit of tension between the non-Muslims, or those people who became Muslim, versus the original Arab peoples. This would later become quite a big issue. The Umayyad dynasty began to face a lot of problems. They ruled the empire like they were tribal leaders. They showed a lot of favoritism to those of pure Arab ancestry, and the conquered peoples were all treated as second-class citizens. Also, the Umayyad peoples lived a very opulent lifestyle at the expense of those they had conquered, and they set up a court in Damascus that was very lavish. Finally, the Umayyad Caliphate was somewhat seen as an illegitimate leadership, because the Umayyads were not necessarily direct descendants from Muhammad, and the Shiite branch of Islam felt that the rulers should be directly from Muhammad's line. Well, there was a lot of unrest from the Shiite and the non-Arab Muslims, and eventually Abu al-Abbas, who was a descendant from Muhammad's uncle, was chosen to found the Abbasid dynasty, which lasted until 1258. In 750 AD, Abu al-Abbas captured Damascus, and as well as the Umayyad family, and had them put to death. There were a few who escaped to Spain to found the Moorish Empire in Spain. Abu al-Abbas founded his headquarters in Baghdad rather than Damascus, which shifted the capital farther east, and this time, instead of focusing on military conquest to expand the Muslim empire, they instead focused on creating a very solid and secure Islamic empire. They stopped the discrimination between Arab Muslims and other Muslims, and so Islam became even more diverse because people were willing to join Islam now that the discrimination was ended. They also created a more sophisticated bureaucracy, which encouraged learning and brought the golden age of the Muslim empire. It brought a lot of wealth and power into the Muslim empire. Baghdad, the Abbasids' capital, was a beautiful city. It was created to be a circle with the palace at the center, and all the radiating parts went out to the outlying areas of the city. It became a center of the arts, where poetry and philosophy and scholarship were prized greatly. In fact, poets and scholars and philosophers were paid very good wages in Baghdad, and so it brought many scholars from all over the empire and even all over the world to Baghdad because of those benefits. Meanwhile, back in Spain, the Umayyad dynasty survived through the one survivor that was left after the hostile takeover, and there was an independent Muslim state that was established. Here also, the arts and learning were cultivated, and there were many Jewish and Christian scholars who came to the Umayyad dynasty in Spain because it was more tolerant of religion than any later Christian leaders would be in Spain. And the Umayyad dynasty in Spain was well known for its beautiful architecture. This is a picture of the Alhambra on the inside, and the Alhambra was a fortified palace at the city of Granada, which is down in the south. It was one of the high points of Muslim civilization in Spain. There are huge gardens and pools that are very reflective and marble columns. Cordoba was also another city where there was a great center for learning. Scholars studied math and science and philosophy. Around 850 AD, the Muslim Empire began to fragment. Lots of little independent states began to emerge, such as Egypt, and farther in the east as well, and it began to lose its potency. Invaders from Central Asia, named Seljuk Turks, migrated into the Middle East in the 900s, the same time period that the Vikings were migrating down from the south. The Seljuk Turks adopted Islam, and they built an empire across the Fertile Crescent. The Seljuk Turks conquered Baghdad in 1055 and kept the Abbasid Caliph there simply as a figurehead in order to run the bureaucracy. But the threat of the Byzantine Empire made the Seljuk Turks focus on bringing down Constantinople. Also, during their rule, they forbid Christian pilgrims from visiting Jerusalem, and this sparked Urban II's crusade in 1095. Finally, in 1216 AD, a new wave of invaders came, and these were Genghis Khan and his Mongolian warriors. They swept out of Central Asia, and they adopted Islam, and in 1258 AD, Hulag, Genghis's grandson, destroyed Baghdad and killed the Abbasid figurehead. And in the late 1300s, Timur the Lame, or who we call Tamerlane, was, even though he was Muslim, also attacked these same areas and put them under his own empire. He also attacked Russia and India, including them in his great empire.